order. And if you can please call roll.
Senator Neal. Senator Tishner. Representative Bojanowski.
Here.
Representative Fleming. Brittany Abdelahad. Philip Baker. Angela Masden. George Nichols. Rebecca Nicholas.
Here.
Jody Wartenberger. Allison Ball. Representative Tipton. Co-Chair Nemus.
Present.
Co-Chair Banta.
Present. Thank you. And just a reminder, please silence your cell phones. I'd like to recognize my co-chair, Senator Nemus. And let's see, does anybody on the committee have a guest or anybody that they would like to recognize? I'm going to recognize Kim Chevalier from JCPS because I hired her into Kentucky first. So it was my idea first. And then JCPS stole her. It's okay. I'm over it almost. And can we have a motion to approve the minutes for September 10th, please? Motion, second? Okay, second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. And the minutes are approved. All right. And go ahead and start. Okay. We're going to start with enrollment, attendance, and truancy trends, the Kentucky Department of Education. If you could please step up and introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. Jay Ritter with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Good afternoon. Jesse Carlton with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Matt Ross with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Thank you. When you're ready, just go on ahead.
Thank you. My name is Matt Ross. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations. We are very happy to be here today, and thanks for the invitation. I just sort of wanted to kick us off with sort of expectations, right? So when we're talking about enrollment, attendance, membership data, it's sort of a question of what KDE has, when we have, and then sometimes it's when do we get that data in the year? And then some of it is district-owned data that KDE doesn't necessarily have access with to because it belongs to the district. The data belongs to the district. So, for example, we have attendance data for 23-24, but that's because that attendance data is used for funding purposes. My office has SEEK in it, right? So attendance is the biggest driver of SEEK funding for school districts. And that is, we get that information from the superintendent's annual attendance report. So we have SAR data for 23-24. We do not have chronic absentee data for 23-24. That data is collected through a different way, and then that has to be validated. We run a report that gets validated by each school district, right? So they've got to sign off on their data that our report is right. So we don't have 23-24 chronic absentee data, but we have 22-23, so we'll show you that. And then we don't have really the data as far as enrollment in private school, enrollment in homeschool. That data would only show up, what we would have is if a child had been enrolled in Kentucky Public School and then withdrew to homeschool or withdrew to private school, we could see that withdrawal. But if a child is never in Kentucky Public School, we wouldn't have that number. We simply don't track that. And when a child withdraws to homeschool or is in homeschool, that is just reported to the district, really. So it's not something that KDE has or manages. So I think with that, we can launch into our presentation. Kick it off, Jay.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk through a few of these slides and let Jesse get into some of the finer points and in the weeds of this. But as Matt pointed out, the Division of District Support at the Department of Education collects a lot of data. Some of this is financial, a lot of it's demographic, students, teachers, et cetera, administrators. We use several systems to kind of corral this data. One of the larger ones, Infinite Campus, which many of you are probably familiar with. And some of this data.
Can you pull your
eventually-
mic a little closer?
I sure
Thanks.
can. Sorry, I'm usually louder than that. Some of this data is used for SEEK funding, which is the large funding model of how to allocate state funds to our 171 school districts, including JCPS. And of course, during COVID, some of this data was very hard to either collect, validate. So some of the data has been frozen for a period of time. You'll see that in our charts as we move forward.
Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about membership versus enrollment. Thanks. A lot of times when people, sorry.
There you go.
Thanks. A lot of times when people talk about students, they ask for enrollment data. We're going to show you membership data and talk about the differences and why we use membership data. Membership is a count one time during the year. It's we say as of 6/30, but it's the last day that you're enrolled in the school. And that's the way that we kind of capture every student just once. If you're talking about enrollments, a student can have multiple enrollments, special transient students who move a lot during the year. They may have an enrollment at 1, 2, up to, several districts. So we like to talk about membership data. That way we're not duplicating students. Okay, it's one count during the year. Bless you. ADA, adjusted average daily attendance, that's what our SEEK funding data is based on. But once again, it has a lot of kind of wiggle room in it, what I call it, because there's some adjustments that go into that data. There's adjustments for NTI days. There's adjustments for weather days. So it's also not a bodies in seats. You can have a classroom that has 30 students in it, but your ADA may only be 27 because, kids miss. They're not always there. So we like to stick with that membership number that counts one student once a year. Going over just a little bit more, some of the things Matt talked about, unavailable truancy data, that is going to be district tracked and managed. We'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. The homeschool data is also managed, and the way they manage the homeschool data is if you have a student who is your resident student in your district, they do have to provide it's normally the Director of Pupil Personnel Office, the DPP office, with a homeschool letter, designating my student will be homeschooled. A lot of times districts do it a little bit different for private schools as well. They're also going to notify their resident district if they're going to be in homeschool or in private school, so that DPP is not looking for that child, trying to enroll the child. They've notified them and they have it on, in their records at the district level. But there's no way to track that in our student information system as of right now. They provide those letters to the district, and the district keeps up with those. All right, truancy. So truancy charges are only filed at the district level. And districts do not report to KDE any of their data on who they file truancy on, when they file truancy. There is a statute that defines truancy. That's 3 unexcused events in your truant, and then 6 unexcused events, and that's designated as a habitual truant. Now, those events are, that's not a day absent, that's not a half day absent, that's any event, any tardy, any, time away from school where they have, they check in late, they woke up late, they checked out to go to, if there's no excuse attached to it, it starts counting towards truancy on those unexcused events, okay? Now, the truancy laws are consistent statewide. That's the statute, that's what it is. But in talking to DPPs and in talking to all the districts, you'll find that there's different thresholds of when different districts will take truancy to their local judges. Depending on caseloads and everything else, they kind of get a feel for their judge in their area of when they want to see, the truancy cases come to them. Once again, the non-public school, I think I skipped ahead and talked already about how those are tracked at the district level.
All right, so we've got some data for you all. Is there a question, Chair? Okay.
She was signaling. We'll let you go ahead.
Okay. When we talk about, again, Jesse talked about membership. We're going to go back before COVID, and we broke this up a little differently than we usually do. We wanted to show Jefferson, obviously, but we also wanted to show the 170 other districts, and then statewide, as you include them all. And you'll notice in Jefferson's case and statewide, there's almost a consistency there. Jefferson a little less, of course, over that period of 2016 to 2024. And if you'll note towards the bottom there, we use some data from the school report card, and this was validated by the districts when they send this data in. That's an important gap in time because of COVID. So our data, we're pretty comfortable with it, but we'd much prefer to get it through our superintendent's annual report. That's how we've done it for many, many, many years. But in this case, we kind of had to take what we can get to fill that gap for membership data. And you'll notice as a state, statewide, of course, we've dropped quite a few. Those of you that have had to suffer through my presentations over here have heard me talk about the decline in enrollment, the decline in AADA. A lot of our counties, Eastern especially, have experienced this. Deep West, your Ballard, your Fulton, and Hickman have shown some declines as well over time. And of course, we have the Triangle. JCPS has lost, obviously, according to this, and some other larger districts too. So as a state, we've actually lost some of that enrollment. By this, 655,000 members, now down to about 636,000. So attendance rates, even pre-COVID attendance, I think for the department, it's a very important number that we monitor, that we pay attention to. And as you'll see in 2016, statewide average is about 94.5. This was a pretty expected number. You see a consistency, pardon me, in the 94s. And in Boone County, 96 was pretty common, it looks like, in high 95. And Fayette is about along with our average. And Jefferson, just barely below the statewide average pre-COVID. And you'll notice between 2020 and 2022, no data exists. We popped back out of the other side of COVID, and we're hitting statewide, we've dropped significantly. This was obviously a concern throughout COVID. And then as we talked to districts, as we do, we were told that the absences were stacking up, attendance rates, of course, and you have your usual flu outbreaks, COVID outbreaks, anything, weather. There's some adjustments out there for these, but when you see high 80s and lower 90s, this is obviously a concern, I think, for everybody that's involved in this business. You'll notice, too, in the footnote about low attendance days and weather days, districts get so many days to adjust out. So if you take your low attendance days, your low was at 5, I believe, and factor those and things like that. So there is some buffer in there for them to have. We had the tail end of a flu outbreak. They may not necessarily be penalized, but if there's a longer stretch of illness, it can ultimately impact their attendance rates. So this is another interesting slide. We deal with all the school districts, and there was open enrollment in House Bill 563. This applied to non-resident students that wanted to go sort of cross that border, if you will, to JCPS or to Oldham or to Bullitt. And the way to look at it is it's kind of a two-way street. You've got students that leave the district and then students that are coming into the district. JCPS has a non-resident policy that's limited to independent districts within Jefferson County, which is Anchorage currently. And you'll notice 34 students from Anchorage, which is a K through 8 district, enrolled those students over in Jefferson County schools. And then of the students that are leaving the district, you'll see a large chunk of these, 322, going to Cloverport. This is due to a virtual school that was opened, I believe, 2 years ago. And Cloverport Independent started a virtual school and was picking up students from across the state, so not just JCPS. Obviously, the neighboring districts, Oldham, Shelby, Bullitt, they're picking up those students as well. These may be kids that live right on that border. It could be deeper into Jefferson County. But there's some, back and forth between most districts. But in this case, JCPS allows those Anchorage students to come. And outside of that, we didn't find students from, outside of Jefferson County schools. So this was another, topic that's popped up multiple times throughout the last couple of years about chronic absenteeism. This is a definition that was created in 2018. This is 10% or more of scheduled time. Each minute of the day does count, and we have not yet gotten 2024 verified, but there's not much to say here that's positive. There's large numbers here. Chronic absenteeism in Jefferson County, 2023 was about 38.27. You'll notice pre-COVID, we were looking at some extremely different numbers, and those increases obviously are a concern. And as soon as we have 2024 data, we'll obviously have that out and ready to go for everybody here. I'm not sure exactly when we get that. If it's later, it will be
It's going to be pushed probably till about end of October.
end of October. So here in about a month or two, we should have that data available. But this is a concern, like I said. The changes over 70% in some of these districts, and statewide about 67% increase. So when we sort of look at this from a statewide perspective, the lowest in chronic absenteeism appears to be smaller independent districts or smaller county districts such as Hickman. You'll notice that Anchorage, Fort Thomas, Beechwood, and Murray all had the lowest in chronic absenteeism. We have 78 districts with over 30% chronic absenteeism, and then 13 over 50% of their students were chronically absent. JCPS, the topic of the day, of course, is about 133rd if you look at our state. So you've got 171. They're not at the worst end of it, but certainly, towards that with 133rd out of 171 districts. And I think that's all we have, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some questions. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you. Do you happen to have data on JCPS enrollment goes back to, say, early 70s? So you can see, I know in Jefferson County with mandatory desegregation, I wanted to kind of look at how that impacted our enrollment.
I don't think the department has enrollment data going back that far. For budgeting purposes, we typically have about a 20-year window that we use, and it's usually going to be your average daily attendance. We can provide that. I'd be happy to provide that if it'd be helpful.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. And Senator Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Are you aware of any correlation between poverty and attendance rates in terms?
I can't really speak to specifics on that. It's not, we look at numbers all day pretty much.
So you did no analysis on that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
JCPS in line with districts, well, you don't do that because you don't do the analysis. Do you have statistics from which an analysis or conclusions can be drawn?
I think
Do you
we
keep
could
those kind of numbers?
Yeah, I think we could provide you, Senator, with some of this data, for example, chronic absenteeism, and you could easily line up poverty levels in those same communities. It would probably have to be at the county level, of course.
Of course, now poverty particularly, and you made a distinction between larger and smaller. Poverty is normally in areas of concentration, and I'm assuming the same is in, let's say, JCPS example. So do you have numbers that can break it down by virtue of those concentration of poverties in a district?
We could go to probably the school level, because we're going to have like chronic absenteeism data at the school level, and then we'll have other identifiers on those school level populations as racial breakdowns, free and reduced lunch breakdowns, homeless, migrant, all of those things. They would have to be compiled together.
Isn't that on the school report?
Not on the chronic absenteeism.
When you say
Not broken
school,
down that far.
pardon me. When you say, pardon me, Madam Chair.
No, please proceed.
When you say school levels, you're talking about at the building level. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you do have that information.
Yes, we would have to compile it together. It's not all compiled together. We have them in separate silos, if you will. We have attendance data, and then we have your poverty level indicators that you're looking for.
So would you be so kind to at least reach out to me so we have that discussion? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and please share that with the rest of the committee. We'll make sure everybody gets that. And yes.
Asking her for is a conversation between her and them. So you might want to be more specific about what you want from her.
Okay. Senator Nemes, did you?
Yes, on the chronic absenteeism, you had 38 plus for Jefferson County Public Schools, 29.5 for statewide. Do you have that with the statewide without Jefferson County? Since Jefferson County is 1/6, 1/7 of the students, the statewide would be skewed with just, okay, can you send that?
Yeah, we'll have to go back and recalculate, because you have to take out all of those duplicate kids. I'm going to be honest, because in the chronic absenteeism count, the definition at the state level that has been created is you have to be enrolled a minimum of 10 days to be, accountable. Accountable is not the right word. To be counted in that district. Okay, so when I take out Jefferson County, I also need to make sure if a student has been in Jefferson County for a handful of days, then they're counted back to the state. So, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly
Okay,
that
yes.
detailed. I just
Okay.
Back of the
thanks.
napkin.
Yes.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shay, I'm sure you've been waiting all day for me to ask you a question. On the items you mentioned that data is collected at the district level, it's not communicated to KDE. If the General Assembly decided that it's important for us to understand that data at a statewide level, would a requirement that districts report that information to KDE be feasible so we could articulate that information and decipher it?
So are you asking about like truancy events
I'm
reporting?
talking about things like truancy, non-public school students, homeschool students, data that you don't have.
Yeah.
Would it be feasible for the districts to report that data to you? And then so would you all have the ability to articulate that to the public legislature?
We would need to change our overall kind of view on collecting data because as of right now, the student information system, it's kind of a standard rule. It only has public school students in there. If you're asking us to capture a larger amount, that's going to be a fairly heavy lift on the districts, but they could technically put those in there, but we're going to need to figure out a way to differentiate between, make sure public school students are still public school students and the other tracking is the other tracking. You're going to be putting a lot of kids into your public school tracking database.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I could ask another question.
Yes, please proceed.
On your membership trends, obviously they're going down. I've been hearing a lot that we are facing an enrollment cliff at some point in time due to birth rates in our country. Do you all have any data in anticipation on what we can anticipate in the future? How many fewer students are we going to have that will be be in the school systems in the future? Do y'all have any data on that?
We don't specifically track birth rate data, but we do work with the governor's office, budget office, OSBD, to when we were building our trending models, that birth rate. They look at Medicaid enrollments, et cetera. And so we might be able to pull some of that data out of there and share that to see if they project some type of cliff in 5, 10, 15 years. We also look at for a completely different reason, the U of L population study, which tends to go out pretty far. I want to say 20 years, if I remember correctly. We use that actually for school facilities. So we might be able to also kind of glean from that same data to answer that question here, or Representative.
Madam Chair, one more.
Go ahead.
And I think this question is going to be more for clarification for the members of this task force. I'm sure there were some questions raised about why Cloverport had so many students from JCPS. I believe the last enrollment account I had at the end of the school year, they had about 1,400 students in their virtual program statewide. Understanding how SEEK works in relation to appraised value in communities, it's my understanding that a student going to Cloverport would receive about $12,000 in state money from because of their low appraisal value compared to a district like Jefferson County. That I brought the wrong book with me, or I'd have the numbers for you, Shay, but a significantly lower amount of money.
Yeah. So
And that's in relation to the appraised. Could you kind of articulate a little bit how that works?
Sure.
So everybody can get a better understanding of how SEEK plays into all this.
Sure, absolutely. So property assessments, and if any of you have sat through my presentations, I always talk a lot about the demographics of a student body. This student is free lunch. This student has a moderate disability or limited English proficiency, but a large factor in state funding are property assessments. And I'll go to Cloverport or even in my backyard, Frankfort Independent or Franklin County Schools. Every community's property assessment varies, of course. Frankfort Independent, a lot of residential. You notice there's no Toyota sitting in downtown Frankfort, but in Scott County, Toyota impacted them beyond imagination. So with Jefferson County, We have, frankly, no other community quite like that, where the property assessment is the way it is. You have, obviously, off the Gene Snyder Ford, if you go south, you have a certain type of property. If you go west, east, wherever you go. But if you drive south a couple hours, all of a sudden you're in the middle of a soybean field, miles and miles of it. So that impacts the per pupil assessment. And if you think of it just like your home, it gets reassessed every 4 years. The PVA plays a very important part of this funding model. As property assessments ebb and flow, right now it seems like they're flowing north. That can impact a district's funding through their facilities funding, through a funding called Tier 1. And this ultimately can impact how much money reaches each student. So to Representative Tipton's point, you'll see a district maybe on the lower end of the property wealth scale, maybe that's more rural, and their students might get $10,000 per pupil after all is said and done. And you drive up the road an hour and a half, and another district might get $8,000 per pupil. This can be pretty significant between districts, and this data does exist. We're happy to provide it. I think you can see it pretty quickly. Just looking at property assessment per pupil tells a lot about state funding overall, not just at JCPS, but you can see how that can impact Wolfe County, Fulton County, Hickman, JCPS, Boone, Kenton, wherever you may go. Does that help answer your question,
Chair,
Representative?
if I could add one quick comment, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I think that appraisal per student is a significant number. Statewide, it's about $500,000 of appraised value per student. In Jefferson County, it's over $1 million per student. Cloverport, it's under $150,000 per student. So that kind of shows you how that this ratio, I don't know if we have any 50-50 districts or not. They're 50-50 local. Some are pretty close.
We're pretty
but then
close.
we also have them on both ranges depending on the appraisal values in those communities.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. And thank you all for being here. I'm looking at the different numbers, and I want to talk about chronic absenteeism. And this kind of just listening to your conversation, Representative Tishner, how different districts have different situations. Do we have any data in how JCPS compares to other peer cities? Because I know every district has a different challenge, or peer city districts.
Sure. So that's one of the challenges at KDE is we don't have data from like Charlotte and I'm not even sure who their counterparts are. I've seen that they belong to a larger group. And that may be something that JCPS would be better suited to answer about our counterparts outside of the state, that sort of model of larger cities, what their chronic absenteeism rate looks like, and I'm not sure which cities will align with that off the top of my head.
Okay.
Chicago might be too big, but Charlotte might be the right size. So
Yeah, I mean,
but
I'm just looking
we'd be
at
happy
it.
to talk to the district about that and get some information from them and see what they have readily available.
Okay, and are you able to? I guess so. If you could get that data, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
To us as we compare to other peer cities, and also what challenges they may face in that front. Thank you.
I will point out with that, when we pull this data back together, you're not going to see the same 38% looking at that, because if we're looking at different states, this is a Kentucky calculation for Kentucky chronic absenteeism. And that definition is going to be very different than, say, your federal definition, which is used to report federal numbers. So if we're comparing to another city outside of Kentucky, we're going to probably have to drop back to that federal definition for
Okay.
chronic absenteeism, which is different than our state definition. So
How different is the state and the federal? And the reason I say it, like for instance, on the screen that's up, when I see Boone County at 17.21
Right.
and Jefferson County, that makes my eyes
Right.
really get a little buck, But however, I do know that if it could put more in context when I
Yes.
see Jefferson County
Correct.
to, as you mentioned, like a Charlotte or whatever the federal government sees as a peer city.
Correct.
Yeah.
It will be more comparable, yes. The federal definition is still the 10%, but when they count absenteeism, it's any absence over 51% of the day is considered a full day absence.
Okay.
And so then they count that as full day. In Kentucky, we count every minute. So like
Okay.
if you have a 450-minute day and you miss 45 minutes, you miss 10% of that day. So if you were, if you got stuck behind a train, if you, were late getting up, the alarm didn't go off, you could, have a tardy that day, and all of those little tardies will add up to you being chronically absent. And the federal definition is more of a day-long absence counting up to your chronic absenteeism.
So just to be clear, we judge every minute.
Yes.
And so if my son goes to school every minute or misses minutes here,
Yes.
that can add up to a full day. When
Correct.
they just look at, is he here the 51%
Correct.
of the day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So it will lower that number. Jefferson County won't be sitting at 38. I can't tell you off the top of my head what they'll be, but it'll be lower.
Okay.
So I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Nichols.
Yes, could I have a little clarification about that on the chronic absenteeism? Because, like, I don't know if I missed something, but, like, if I add 38.27 to the 89, it comes out to 127. So I don't know how we would be the math on the chronic absenteeism doesn't make sense to me.
Can you, the 89 over on attendance rate?
Right.
Okay, two separate calculations there. Attendance rate is calculated using our funding model, which uses a half-day, whole day. And then chronic absenteeism is a different calculation that uses that every minute of every day to get to the 10%. So on attendance rate, if your student misses 20% of the day, that falls under the 35% threshold for tardy, and the school would get full funding for that day and full attendance for that day. So it's two separate calculations.
Yep.
Attendance rates for funding, chronic absenteeism is to kind of track what's actually going on in the loss of instruction.
So, but couldn't, like, a single student that was chronically absent to the tune of, like, never actually really coming to school but being left on a school's roster end up, like, kind of looking like 4 students instead of just one?
I don't know that it would look like 4 students, but
I'm,
yes.
I'm just talking about from a number standpoint, because if you're counting lost minutes and that student never makes it to school.
Correct. If you leave that student on your roster and you don't withdraw the student in the enrollment, and districts aren't big fans of that. They want to get the student and transfer the records where the student has gone, and that's part of the DPP's responsibility.
Part of the law. Yeah.
Part of the law to figure out where that student is. So we allow a 1-day overlap in enrollments. I can leave District A in the morning and enroll in District B in the afternoon, and they can have an enrollment at both places on one day, but you can't have multiple days. So if I just, get lost and don't come back to District A, but I go over and enroll in District B, and I'm enrolled there for, a week, and my District A enrollment is still running, they will eventually have to request records back. They'll fix that, which is one of the reasons we don't pull attendance data during the year. We leave that to the end to let all of these enrollment issues and everything get cleaned up at the end of the year, because you're correct. If I'm sitting on District A for a week, I'm going to probably bump their chronic absenteeism because you haven't fixed my enrollment and shown that, no, I was actually over in District B the whole time. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank y'all very much for coming through and presenting this information. I want to ask more on the regulatory reporting process that you have within your agency and the school districts. Do you have a list of inventory of reports that it's required with the purpose and who's reporting that information according to that you look at according to the regulations that's called for by the General Assembly?
Yes, we maintain that list, and we have a calendar of superintendent's due dates, which lays out every report that a school district superintendent is responsible for reporting to KDEs. So
Okay.
yes,
I would appreciate if you could provide that
Sure.
a list for me to that, and that's from the superintendents. Did you say?
mm-hmm.
All right. Is there anything from the board?
From the local boards that
Yes.
have to
Yes.
report to KDE. Let me check on that. I can see what we have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd appreciate that to see exactly what's responsible and what's accountable to the board and to you all, as well to the superintendent,
Sure.
and more importantly to the community itself.
So we're talking just overall reports and that are required per regulation or statutes.
Right.
Okay.
And I'll throw a caveat in there is that if it's not in the regulation, but but if they do provide that, I appreciate if you include
Sure.
that as well.
Absolutely.
When you receive these,
You want to continue, Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot to ask.
Please proceed.
Thank you. When you receive the reports from the superintendents, I know y'all put them into your database, do the compilations. What feedback do you provide the superintendents in terms of a commentary or suggestions in order to bring highlight to something that you're seeing within?
Sure, I can speak to that some, and I'll give you a few granular examples, but transportation codes, which are used to track which students, how far they're transported. We analyze those as they come in, all districts. If we see anomalies in their data, and these are items the superintendents sign off on. So it's not just submit, it's you're signing off to say this data is correct.
It impacts funding.
Yeah, it impacts funding. So we're very careful with this data, but we also will ask a lot of questions throughout. If we see a 10, 15% drop in the number of students that rode over a mile a day, we're going to go back to the district. And the answer may be as simple as, we've opened a new school, we have less kids traveling that far now. A lot of times it's something very logical like that, or we've changed routes. We do that. We try to, one of our goals always is to get very valid data, because without it, when we come back over here to talk to you all about funding, budget request, et cetera, if we don't have good data, it just doesn't work very well. Attendance is another one. As that's coming in to KDE from the districts, we call it scrubbing, but they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We have field auditors that do audits every single year, not in every district. I think it's once every 5 years in most districts, but the larger districts, including JCPS, they get a visit from the field auditor once a year to go through their attendance, make sure if there's anything. They're sort of spot checking, not only they're spot checking the transportation codes as well as how they're coding certain types of students to make sure these students are coded correctly, because ultimately that's funding, or lack of coding results in less funding. And what we really want is it to be correct, but we want good processes in place. Of course, JCPS with a number of students, it's not just one person at the district that's doing this. It goes all the way down into the school level with attendance clerks. So they do training throughout the year to make sure even attendance clerks, DPPs, et cetera, are involved in this process to understand this is what KDE is going to look at. Financial data, we do the same thing. We want to make sure that the data coming in from any district goes through an audit. An independent auditor will visit the district. JCPS is required to do this too. Fayette, Boone, everybody. And we work with the independent auditors. There's an audit contract that we do with the state auditor's office and an audit committee. It includes quite a few people, and they're reviewing certain items. If they find deficiencies, or they may make recommendations as independent auditors. KDE works with independent auditors to understand the findings. They may be something as inconsequential as, hey, we noticed this invoice was paid late and it cost you all an extra $30. But it also may show, sloppy work with Red Book or booster groups, or you're not reconciling your bank accounts quickly enough, things like that. So we try to keep, it's kind of a constant juggle, because as things move, the volume will always increase at these districts with, new people, turnover. We got to keep training them to make sure they're doing things correctly. I hope that answers your question.
And that's a very good response. I appreciate the detail and that you lay things out. And I have just one more question, Madam Chair. Thank you. So when you go through these reports and so forth, it's the superintendent that signs off on this. Is that correct?
So they will sign off on a few of these reports, and that will be your superintendent's annual attendance report, which is known as SAR. That contains a lot of your attendance data that drives funding. They will also sign off on the transportation codes. They do not sign off on the annual financial report. That's done so by the independent auditor, and they report that to the board. And you typically have a meeting with the school board to go over their audit with the finance officer, superintendent, and local board, obviously.
And so the board, in that particular case, the board signs off on it, or they approve it, of the audit?
I think they accept the audit as this is our audit for 2025, 2024.
And that's the only thing that you know of that the board is accountable and responsible for.
Off the top of my head, that's the only thing I can think of.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you talked about audits and recommendations and reports. Has KDE looked at chronic absentee and submitted a audit or recommendation report to JCPS to date for?
I don't believe so. No.
And I would
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. We kind of have all of the data in our office from the funding side. I will say that there's another office in KDE, Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, who deals with interventions. And that's more on the, these are my numbers. What can I do about it now? How can I help my schools? How can I help my families? How can I help my students? I don't know off the top of my head what OCIS, that office in KDE, has done, if they've reached out to JCPS, if they have a plan, if they have, pulled anything together. I know they've looked at these numbers from the state aspect. I know we have a chronic absenteeism work group from the state side, but I don't know what those interventions or plans or, supports, thank you, would be.
So there's no.
And we have them in a future meeting, just
there
so
we
you know, Mr. Baker.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Dr. Nichols.
Hi, thank you. I think somebody asked earlier if you had just even the free and reduced lunch numbers, Title I level for the 3 districts that you have listed, because someone had asked if there was an association between socioeconomic background and absenteeism, and there is a strong association between those two. So I think it would be helpful to have those numbers projected if that's something you could get for us. Thank you.
We definitely have those student groups already. I will say that we're working towards breaking out our chronic absenteeism data more by those student groups. When we originally kind of broke it out, we broke it down by the racial and gender groups, but now we're trying to get into those other groups as well.
So even something as simple as you don't know what the free and reduced lunch rate is
No.
those? You do?
I
Okay.
will know. I know what the free and reduced lunch rate for those counties are. I don't necessarily know what the free and reduced lunch of the chronic absentee children.
And that's not even
Does
what
that
I'm
make sense?
asking for.
Okay.
Just the general
Oh,
F&R
yes.
rates for the 3 counties that are listed. I think that would be illuminative.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. It was great. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Neal.
Thank you, madam. The information that you provided here, I assume you have a whole
Yes.
check, and you will make that available.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next, we have the early childhood education, Jefferson County Schools. If you guys could approach and introduce yourselves. Anytime you're ready.
Good afternoon, co-chairs and members. We are here to discuss the great things that are happening in early childhood at Jefferson County Schools. Thank you, Dr. Banta, for that shout out. Of course, I was a young teacher back then, and you definitely molded who I am today, so I appreciate it. And also, my name is Kim Chevalier. I am the Chief of Exceptional Children in Jefferson County Schools. I oversee multiple programs, state and federal programs, including early childhood. I have over 23 years of experience in over 6 districts in the state of Kentucky, and I have oversight over multiple federal and state programs throughout those districts too. With me is Carlisa Gibson. She's our Executive Director of Early Childhood, and she's our expert when it comes to running our program. So I would like to introduce her and also introduce her team.
Thank you, Chief Chevalier. Yes, again, my name is Carlisa Gibson, and I'm honored to serve as the executive.
Your microphone. Thanks.
Yes. Again, my name is Carlisa Gibson, and I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director for Early Childhood. I want to take a moment, of course, and introduce my colleagues. I have Ann Staley here with me. She is our Director of Early Childhood. And then I also have Nicole Robinson, and she is a Child Development and Education Specialist with JCPS. So each of us here, of course, is deeply committed to shaping the future of our community through early childhood education. Our work focuses on providing the highest quality education to our youngest learners. Also, two, supporting their development across academic, social, and emotional domains. We collaborate closely to ensure that the program prepares children for success, of course, in kindergarten and beyond. Today, we are going to share the significant impact of our early childhood program. We also want to discuss how we are addressing those challenges as well and show how we continue to exceed the state standards in delivering high-quality early education. Switch over to the next slide. All right. We're going to also speak about our mission and vision. The mission statement for JCPS, the Early Childhood Program shapes the future by empowering children and families. Also, too, our vision is to cultivate classrooms of excellence, empower families, prepare students for kindergarten, and improve our community. The program strives to provide equitable access to high-quality early education and interventions to students within our community. These students are often at the most significant risk of falling behind within proper interventions. Our program, it's inclusive because, as we all know, that research shows that the children learn best together. Also, too, addressing the whole child's needs when engaged in those social and active and collaborative learning experiences. So by investing in our youngest learners, we are laying the foundation in school and life. So looking at the state-funded preschool and who qualifies, of course, at the state level, children who are 4, and that is before August the 1st and considered at risk, and it's based upon that income at or below that 160% of that poverty line. And then also to qualify children who are 4, that could be in foster care or consider homelessness by McKinney-Vento, and then of course your income based as well for those children. And then additionally, children who are 3 or 4 years old, that meets that eligibility requirement as a child with a disability. And as we all know that in 1990, the Kentucky Education Reform Act, it had designed to support children most at risk of academic failures. All right, so we also want to just speak about the comparison of what the state requires and then also to what JCPS program operations does. So whenever you look at 704 KAR 3410 section 6, it speaks in there in regarding the sessions, 5 half days a week or the 4 half days a week with the 5th day for services to families. Also, to the minimum in regards to the state requirements is a minimum of 2.5 hours, and then you have to provide breakfast or lunch is required, a part of that as well. Group size ratio is 1 adult per 10 children. The maximum group size within a classroom, depending on the size of the classroom, is 20 children. And then again, too, you have home visits, and that's 2 required visits per child per year. Whenever we look at what we do at JCPS, above of what those state program operations state there in that regulation, we do offer a student instructional day. It's 10:30 to 1:30 p.m. We do have, it's Monday through Friday, except 2 Fridays throughout the month is used for those family engagement days. And then also, too, we focus on literacy, language, and math, and again, those social skills. We have group activities. We have large, small group, individual group time. The selected center time is usually around 20 minutes. And then, we have selected center time. And then also, too, our gross motor time is around 20 minutes. We have family engagement days, but we go above and beyond, and we also do family events as well. That way we have a great connection with our families and we know, our community. Another thing, too, is that we have free and before, after instructional, it's our enrichment time. And so during that time, we have activities during, it's art, science, STEM, theme kits. We also have the read aloud group learning. And during that time, I will say that we have a equitable school day to where all of our locations is at 6 hours for the school day, because we want to make sure that we accommodate, our working families. So we have the 10:30 to 1:30 time, but then you can also come before or after and have that 6-hour school day. All right, Nicole Robinson is going to speak on us about kindergarten readiness.
Okay. At JCPS, we have a multifaceted approach to ensure that our students are fully prepared for kindergarten. This year, we're proud to enter our second year of implementing our comprehensive curriculum, Pre-K on My Way, which is aligned with the science of reading and provides students with a solid literacy foundation. Our teachers receive extensive professional development on our curriculum, including support by scholastic coaches through 6 coaching cycles. We also utilize programs such as Second Step and Camp Ready for K, which focus on building social skills and readiness for kindergarten, while supplemental resources like Waterford, which is an online learning platform that we use in the classroom, it provides individual learning opportunities for our students as well. And this past summer, Camp Ready for K marked a significant milestone by celebrating its 10th consecutive year of supporting incoming kindergarten students. The camp was hosted at 5 different JCPS sites, and it provided essential preparation for the new school year for these incoming kindergartners. Overall, kindergarten readiness was 65% for these students who attended the JCPS Camp Ready for K. Through Brigance assessments, we analyze student data and as students enter into the program, and we track that progress to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. And as Ms. Gibson mentioned, we do have Collaborative Fridays. That's for family engagement events, but it also gives our staff time for planning, to complete those home visits, to conduct professional learning communities, and just really gives us time to reflect and improve our practices. We've strengthened our readiness program with the pyramid model and conscious discipline, emphasizing social emotional learning, supported by OSEP and the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. The pyramid model aims to provide every child with the support and experiences needed to excel in social and academic development. And with the preschool all-star ratings returning, we're excited to implement this model, which will be assessed via the Teaching Pyramid Model observation tool, the Teapot. We have 6 BCBA specialists that deliver targeted behavioral interventions and support, while our comprehensive coordinated early intervening services associates aid students in overcoming transition barriers from early childhood to kindergarten. We have bilingual associate instructors that offer instructional support for our multilingual learners and enhance communication with those families. And professional development is a big priority in our early childhood program. We had an additional 3-day targeted training during our pre-service window for all early childhood staff. We have an intensive early childhood new teacher cadre to ensure that our new educators are supported and well prepared to meet the needs of all of our students. Our classrooms feature hands-on learning environments with STEM, gross motor, social skills development, and again, we also host many family engagement events annually. So all of these efforts are showing real results. So based on our internal kindergarten readiness assessment from fall to spring, we saw a 26% increase in overall physical development. We showed a 30% increase in students writing their first name, and improvements in cognitive concepts like letter naming and social emotional growth. And these results demonstrate the effectiveness of our program in preparing our students for kindergarten. And when looking at our Brigance data, Our Brigance data shows students entering kindergarten from fall of 2023 shows that our JCPS early childhood students scored 51% on kindergarten readiness. And this is compared to 46% readiness for the overall district. So this indicates that students participating in our early childhood programs are better prepared for school than their peers, both within and outside the JCPS system. And now Ms. Gibson is going to speak about future expansion of early childhood facilities.
Of course, currently our numbers, we are at 1,888 students within our program, and we have 789 that are returning from the, we have 789 that are returning from the previous year, which showing that strong family engagement and the confidence in our program. Additionally, we have 1,131 of our enrolled students that receive special education services, which is 58% of our population. And 505 are the home primary language is not English. So we are proud to announce that we are expanding our early childhood facility. This is going to open in the 2026-2027 school year. The center is going to feature 23 classrooms, accommodating up to 460 students, and then it will also include inclusive playgrounds. It will consolidate early childhood classrooms from several elementary schools, also creating more space for those K through 5th students within those elementary schools and improving support services. Additionally, it's going to enhance collaboration among instructional teams, as well as the location is behind Watterson Elementary. And then the center, of course, is going to significantly boost our ability to serve that community within that area. So despite our successes, we also face significant challenges, particularly in staffing. So early childhood teachers each must hold the Interdisciplinary Early Childhood Education IECE certification and the passing of the praxis that is not related to the instruction and standards for teaching preschool. So instructional assistants, they also have to have a passing score on the Kentucky Paraeducator Assessment, the KPA, or they have to have 48 college hours, which makes it difficult to maintain full staffing. So currently we have 24 teacher vacancies and 154 IA vacancies. In order for us to address those solutions, because I know our numbers, especially whenever you look at the instructional assistants, that number is very high. So we are partnering with local universities, including the University of Louisville, Campbellsville University, and also Simmons College of Kentucky, and hope to tackle that staffing challenge. These partnerships, they aim to develop a pipeline of future educators, offer targeted professional development, and create hands-on internship opportunities. The University of Louisville now provides the Option 7 program. It allows an individual with a bachelor's degree of any type in any field, of course, to achieve that IECE certification in just 15 months. While hopeful about these initiatives, we continue to face challenges in recruiting instructional assistants and teachers with an IECE specific certification. Teachers and IAs are crucial for supporting high-quality education and meeting state-required classroom ratios, and then, of course, the personnel regulations from the state. So this ongoing need does underscore the importance of our partnership efforts and the development of future educators. I also want to take the time to thank each of you for your unwavering support. Our work in early childhood education is not just a matter of policy. It is a vital investment in the future of our community and our children. By confronting our challenges and continuously improving our programs, we are laying the foundation for future success. I do want to speak on my personal journey that underscores why I'm here today. At 22, I completed a bachelor's degree in criminal law with plans to attend law school. To support myself, I worked as a correctional officer. During that time, my evenings were spent distributing mail to inmates, primarily letters from families. Several moments stayed with me whenever the inmates asked, "Officer Gibson, can you read my mail later?" The desperation and longing in their voices revealed the profound impact that basic literacy, or the lack thereof, can have on a person's life. So this experience was a pivotal moment for me because I went from being a correctional officer to an instructional assistant to a teacher, then to a formal complaint investigator and a specialist looking at disproportionality, and then director of where I am today. So it made me realize that early education is not just about imparting knowledge, it is about addressing the root causes of larger social issues. Research consistently shows that investing in high-quality preschool education can significantly reduce future incarceration rates, lower high school dropout rates, and decrease disciplinary issues in school. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions. Okay,
Yes.
so we'll begin with Mrs. Abdelahed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I just have a couple of questions. I realized the two questions, sorry. The first one is regarding the enrollment data, just overall from like year over year. And I'm sure you have that for many years, but just maybe whatever makes sense if we could follow up and see like 2018 to now, just to see how that enrollment, and then however you're able to break it down by like demographic or like we were talking about free and reduced, et cetera. That would be awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. And then my actual question is, from a vacancy perspective, the teachers and the instructional assistants, how do you manage on a day-to-day basis given all of those vacancies with the enrollment numbers that you have?
Right. So currently right now we have a contract with the university instructors. And so with that contract, we have 100 instructional assistants. So that has been a great help to us. However, we know that we can't sustain that contract. So with that has been a help in regards to, looking at staffing. That, sometimes we have to have more students in classrooms, which we would rather not have as many students in a classroom, especially if you look at specific need. So we always try to look at that as well. Some classrooms may have up to 20 students, and we may have to freeze a classroom in order to where, we have 20, meeting in a ratio to where we could have 15 in one classroom.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question for you. The Praxis and the other tests that you were talking about, do you feel that your best teachers have the highest Praxis scores and the highest scores on the other tests that you're talking about for the instructional aides? Do you feel that that's necessary and that it makes you a better teacher or a better instructional aide to have a high score on that?
I will say that we have some grandfather teachers that are amazing teachers. And looking at instructional assistants too, looking at what the KPA is and how many that we have substitutes that come in that don't take the KPA that are absolutely amazing. And, we've heard them say, "I can't pass the KPA." So yes, I would say that looking at the KPA and our substitute teachers or even our grandfather teachers that don't have to do that, they're still performing very high level.
That was very, very politically well said. Thank you. Mr. Wertenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here and sharing all this good information. I appreciate it. I'm going back to your really good impacts that you ticked through.
Yes.
As it relates to physical development, writing, first name, cognitive concepts, language increase, all great percentage increases. Overall, kindergarten readiness of 51%. My question is, do you all establish goals for each of those things? And I'm just curious, if so, where you landed with respect to your goals on that.
Absolutely. So we look at our kindergarten readiness data each year. Also, too, we look at the Bergance data because every kindergarten student, before, as they enter kindergarten, they have to take that Bergance. So we also look at that data and then determine each year where we want to be as a district. And so then this year, I know that you've got the, in regards to the data,
we don't have the historical data with us, but of course we're always striving to improve. The gains are wonderful, but the acceptable rate of failure is 0, and we want all of our students to be at the highest level. So we do establish goals. We do that by each location, and we've hit some of those marks, and some of those marks we have fallen short on some of those, but that is something that we look at continuously, especially on those collaborative Fridays as professional learning communities.
If I may have
Yes.
a follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious on the 51%, if there was a goal of 50% or 60% that you were looking to achieve or something along those lines.
yes, so we had some locations that were even at 80%.
Mm.
And so we know that looking at that location, we also have to take an effect to looking at every location is different depending on the needs. Some locations have more ECE students. So we do it more by location. They set the goal, and then as our program, of course, we want to make sure whenever we come back, we have not got those scores in regards to the Bergance data that the kindergarten students. So we're waiting for that to come. They'll take that on October the 15th before we set our goal for the year.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Mr. Nichols.
I want to thank the representatives for coming today and sharing the data. And what I have is more for the task force. I think we should keep in mind, and I'm going to kind of make a little pitch for expanding early childhood to the entire Commonwealth and making it available to all students and all learners. I think we have to keep in mind when we're talking about a metropolitan poor and a metropolitan student that is, free and reduced versus one that's more rural or Appalachian. I think from my experience and what I've seen, our students are a lot more transient than what I see students from rural districts. And I think that presents a whole nother set of challenges. And I think when you're thinking about funding and you're thinking about making good outcomes for all students, I think, again, I'm going to make that pitch for maybe the legislators here can take it back with their brethren. Let's give all students an opportunity, despite income levels, and maybe that integration of different income levels. Maybe a rising tide can raise all ships. I think that the early start is super important, and I think that all students could benefit. But again, I just want to kind of point out too, like in my experience and what I've observed, for the rural poor folks, that kid that's struggling is probably going to see all of his same classmates through the first 5 grades at least. And I'm sure this committee can testify that in an early childhood situation, you might see, many students within the same classroom. And it's just kind of a revolving door, and not just of students, but of adults that are supporting them, and then community groups that might be supporting them, or, administrators. It's just all these kids see in the metropolitan area is just a constant, like, adults coming in and out, in and out, in and out. And I hope that we can find a place where all students can benefit from an early childhood education.
Thank you. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I had in mind, I think, was mostly answered by response to a previous question. But, Madam Chair, if I have 2 things.
Sure.
One, is there, or do you have data that shows a correlation between early childhood exposure and that 3rd grade cliff as it relates to student performance going forward?
I do not have that data in front of me. Of course, that is something that we could, reach out to the data department to see if they can pull that.
I would ask for that data if we could. And secondly, you said there's. I just want to make sure I understood this. The deficit or the challenge that you have with respect to your 24 instructors short is the problem with sustainability of the supports that you do have that enables you to do your work on a high level. Is that a correct way of saying it?
So we have 24 teachers, and then the instructional assistants is the 154.
Right. Well, you were short. I thought I read that. You how many short?
154
Oh my
instructional
goodness!
assistants.
So I missed. Okay. So going back to the same question, is your challenge sustainability of that? The way you've put that together with your supports, is that the central problem there, and you're maintaining high levels with the supports?
Yes. So, of course, the challenges, I believe, like we spoke on, is the IEC certification specific, and then also, too, the KPA exam. So what we have done in order to still provide that high-quality education, we have the contract with the university instructors. We've been working alongside with several universities in order to build that partnership and hope to gain more. But having the university instructors there, that has helped us to have supports within the classroom that fill that role of the instructional assistant. But we know we can't sustain that.
Madam Chair, just one question, one more.
Yes.
Thank you. And you may have answered this, it went over my head. So with the support you have, is that tied into developing additional, preparing others to step into these shoes or be prepared to take the next step and become teachers?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes. We have several instructional assistants that have become teachers. And so that's what we hope is to grow those instructional assistants into teachers.
Well, thank you very much. Your presentation has been very encouraging.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, I have two questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. On the first question is, it's kind of a two-part question, but have you seen an influx, or what are your McKinney-Vento numbers? Have they increased since, I guess, post-pandemic? And if so, what challenges are you seeing in that space as it pertains to early childhood?
So in regards to the numbers, I don't have that in front of me. I can't get those numbers. But as far as
and you can just say if it's increased or decreased.
As far as the last time that we looked, it was around the same as what we had last year.
Okay. And then the second is, in the same vein, I know, for lack of a better term, there has been a boost in multilingual learners in JCPS. How has your department adjusted to that? And also, are there any challenges with seeing an increase in multilingual learners as it pertains to also staffing, among other things?
Yes. I'll let Nicole speak.
Okay. There's probably two things that come to mind when thinking about how we address that. First of all, we've added some additional bilingual associate instructor positions in early childhood, and they work directly with students individually and in small groups. And we've also this year incorporated a real focus on professional development for all teachers and staff. And we've partnered with our Office of Multilingual Learners to provide that professional development, just to build up their toolboxes to be able to meet the needs of those students in the classroom.
I'd also, I'd also like to add a little something to that. Also with our family engagement opportunities for families, both during the school day and after the school day, that's where we really come alongside and try to partner with our families. And we have supports in place to make sure that all families, regardless of what their first language is, feel welcome and are able to participate in those activities.
May I have a slight follow-up?
Yes.
All right. You talked about the KPA, or I might be saying it wrong, the paraeducators exam, I believe you said, and has that been a barrier, or like how have you navigated those two spaces when it comes to staffing and some other reasons?
Yes, it definitely has become a challenge because just like we were saying earlier in regards to subs, sometimes we have substitutes, IAs, that would love to join and be full-time, but they're not able to pass the exam. So, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may ask one question at a time.
Yes.
Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your presentation. I want to talk a little bit about Head Start. Of course, that's a federal program, and I understand up to a few years ago, JCPS was a sponsor for Head Start, and I believe now the Ohio Valley Educational Co-op is the sponsor of that. For the task force, could you clarify the differences in the qualifications for a student to qualify for Head Start? Do you know how many Head Start students there are in Jefferson County, and how those Head Start students compare to the state-funded students in JCPS on the grants?
I do not have those numbers in regards to the Head Start numbers. I know that we do look at the full utilization, and so with Greater Louisville Education Cooperative, that was around that they maintain around 50 children, and then of course the other one, I think that they were at around 21, but they foresee increasing to that number of 50. But in regards to the full utilization, I have that part, but as far as the numbers, we would have to get that in comparison to what our numbers are.
That's fair enough. I kind of asked a tough question. On your capacity, you mentioned you have 1,888 students in the, I guess it's the state-funded portion. Are you able to, for all the students in JCPS who qualify for state-funded preschool, are you able to provide spots for all those students?
So we are usually, because we have that active enrollment, and so, we have eligibility review periods that show that active enrollment. And with that, we are usually around 3,000 students, a little bit more or a little bit less if I looked at prior data. And so we've never been to where I would say we have capacity. We've been able to serve the students that come to us.
Okay. If I may, Madam Chair, a couple more points. I know some districts have additional capacity. They enroll students who don't qualify and charge tuition, but you all are not in that situation.
No, we do not do the tuition-based.
Okay. And one final question, Madam Chair, if I may. I've been studying Brigance data for 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, when they report Brigance data, it's broken down not only by the total, but you mentioned the 51% in JCPS compared to the 46%. Do you know how you all compare to like Head Start, private preschool, child care? Do you have those numbers on how you compare to those?
Yes. Do you have that? Okay. We did not bring that data with us.
Okay.
But we definitely do have access to that data, and we always look at where we fall, of course, to even in regards to just the state as a whole. And then it also, the data that we have, it shows like the other, where you are if you don't attend, if you were private, and then it also shows that if you didn't.
I think statewide data has been consistently around that 50% kindergarten ready for a period of years now, give or take a point or two. Either way, I took the liberty of looking up the JCPS trend data on the grant scores, and I think, like you said, you're 46%, but I did notice a wide variation between your elementary schools. And you had several schools that were below 25%, and you had one school that was at 8% kindergarten readiness. Could you share with us a little bit about some of the factors that influence those low scores and efforts you are to help those students in those schools? Because we want every student to succeed.
Right.
And when I see numbers like that, it's just alarming to me. So could you elaborate a little bit about why that's happening and what efforts you all have to improve that situation?
Yes. Looking at those scores too, I will add that if you look at how Jefferson County public schools, the students that attended the preschool actually scored higher. And so I know that Ms. Robinson, she has looking at the difference of the scores from the other districts.
So this is just from the fall of 2023. So I'm going to take my quiz. So the JCPS readiness was, of course, 46%, and then the other school districts, I believe, non-JCPS was at 45%, and that was just from the fall of 2023.
I was speaking specifically to schools in Jefferson County that had that wide range. Are there factors like poverty, like multi-language learners? What are the factors that influence those low scores, and what can be done to improve that situation?
No, I believe that, with us having our new curriculum this year, I'm excited to see the difference because we did change the curriculum to pre-K on my way, and those students will be taking that October the 15th. So as far as looking at previous data, I have not dug back into the, other than like last year's data, but prior to that too, I would be interested if we did pull that. I believe that would be a benefit of us to pull that to see even those that didn't attend our program.
Is your curriculum in line with the EL curriculum that JCPS has adopted?
So it does have the EL supports within the curriculum, but as far as the alignment with the kindergarten on, we would.
If I may, he's asking about the named curriculum, not multilingual students. EL, the curriculum the district's using, I believe. Yes.
It was not purchased to align exactly with the EL curriculum, but it is similar in supports, and it is aligned with the science of reading.
Okay. Representative Bojanowski.
Okay. Well, I'm very excited about the new preschool. I work at Watterson, and so I see it blooming every day. Just a quick question, a little bit on your number of students. So do you have 1,888 students, or what was the number 3,000 mentioned?
So we currently enrolled is the 1,888. And of course that continues. I may look at our dashboard tomorrow and, it just continues to grow each day.
And if I may ask one more?
Yes.
And then I understand that some of the students who are going to be transferring from school buildings, you'll move classrooms into the building next to Watterson. Will it also increase capacity, or will your capacity effectively remain the same?
In regards to that, I couldn't tell you what those numbers are because it's based upon eligibility rates.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have those numbers, of course, in
Thank you.
regards to that.
Okay. Savannah Baker.
Hi, that's me. I'm here on behalf of the auditor. I just wanted to first thank you all for being here, and thank you for sharing a little bit of your personal story. I think it's always helpful to remember that we're not just looking at data, but looking at lives, and I just really appreciated your perspective. I have a quick question about your, actually, Madam Chair, I have two questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
In your early childhood program impact data, I see where everything increased by double digits except social and emotional. I was wondering if you could provide like an explanation maybe as to why that is. I'm coming from a generation that I think has a lot of social barriers with social media and things of that nature, so I think I would just love to hear what you think the factors are there.
And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the pre-test data was so high that there wasn't as much room to improve. So there wasn't as much of an increase.
Okay, can you give like a little bit more layman's explanation for that? So meaning like they were already excelling so well there wasn't enough to improve?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I think you've been very diplomatic in your responses about the paraeducator assessment, and I'm just curious because you all are interacting with them on a day-to-day basis. Like if the assessment wasn't a barrier, like what criteria do you think would replace the assessment? So like if we no longer required the test, but obviously we want to make sure that there's qualified people in the classroom, what would be some of the criteria you think we should consider?
Oh, I'm happy to speak to that. I am moving into my position as a former principal in one of our early childhood centers for 7 years. So the year before last, I interviewed over 50 candidates for instructional assistant positions. However, over 40 of those we could not proceed because they could not meet that threshold on the KPA due to the mathematic portion on it, which gets into some higher level math, which of course when we're teaching shapes and groups of things, you just don't need that. So I feel as though that is a real hindrance in helping us address our staffing issues. And so if we could take a closer look at that and look at some different options for assessing folks that we want to hire to work with our youngest learners, that would be a very pragmatic approach to take.
Okay, thank you. And our final question, Mr. Baker.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. What does the kindergarten readiness data look like comparing different demographics like English language learners and ECE students?
We don't have the exact numbers in front of us, but I will say whenever we look at that data, just from memory, that if we looked at our African American students, they actually scored really high whenever we looked at the kindergarten readiness assessment. And then our Hispanic population is who scored the lowest. And then as far as looking at, if we looked at, other races, it did show that they were around the same consistently throughout the, prior years. And then I know that we were just actually speaking about that the other day, how we want to go and look exactly through the prior years to see what our demographic data exactly was for each location, and then how they did it, as well too. So.
And is that kind of same type of thing for ECE students as well?
So that was another thing too. The document that we have in front of us, we don't have the ECE data on that.
Okay.
So that's something else that we could get. Yes.
Thank you all for being here. And
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And if you could send along the questions, we'll share out with everyone, okay? Thank you. Have a great day. And if we could have student discipline district perspectives, come on up. And when you're ready, just introduce yourselves and you can begin.
Sorry, going to utilize Chuck here to get us situated with technology. Sorry, I don't want to mess it up. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Matt Anderson. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Climate and Culture. Thanks for having us here today. We're excited to talk to you about this topic. Dr. Ellison, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll get started.
Dr. Joe Ellison, Assistant Superintendent of High Schools, Jefferson County Public Schools. Good to be with you all again.
And so we think it's important to really start and kind of frame the discipline conversation in a context. Teachers, school administrators, school staff every day increasingly are having to deal with more and more as additional needs pop up with our students every day. And I think it's important to take a look at that locally and nationally and think through how these things are impacting our schools and staff in particular. So as you've kind of heard already today, we've seen an increase in chronic absenteeism and overall truancy that is mirrored not only nationally but within JCPS. As you've heard many times before, student mental health needs are a primary concern, and that is an increasingly issue as students continue to face things that are occurring in their home and in our communities, and those are manifesting themselves in the schools every day. We're also seeing things like community violence as a direct impact, again, to things that are occurring in the community or outside of school, should we say, and then impacting what is happening and what manifests every day in schools. Alongside that, all of those lead to increases in student trauma and traumatic experiences, and that's a tall task on teachers and administrators to work with students as we provide as many supports as we possibly can around those topics. Anecdotally, we have a district trauma team that really works with students, in particular, to make sure they have the resources they need when they're impacting or being impacted and experiencing trauma. Those are supported by district trauma plans that include things like training and additional resources for schools and staff. Student disengagement as a whole in the community, outside just of schools, students being involved and participating in the ways that they have historically. We've seen a drastic decrease in those areas as well. And so it's important to just kind of frame the context and know that it's a little bit different. The climate now is a little bit different in the ways we approach that. It looks different these days, given that context. Obviously, we can't talk student discipline without talking about our student support and behavior intervention handbook. Decisions around consequences, what behaviors are considered inappropriate, all of those things are housed in this handbook. It's not a particular individual, and I'll talk more about our revision process as I walk through a little bit about what is in this. There's a ton of things that we've put into this document. Number one, first and foremost, this outlines all of our specific behaviors that we think are inappropriate for schools, alongside the specific consequences for each student. And we want to be clear about that. We have very high expectations for our students, and we want our families to be aware of that and be clear in what we think are appropriate behaviors and make sure we have and are clear on how we hold students accountable. That is important. You'll also notice there are numerous resources outlined in this document. There are things on bullying prevention. We have other items such as PBIS resources. We have substance abuse resources. All of these things we want students and families to be able to access. In no way did they take the place of traditional consequences, but do think it's important to mirror those consequences with appropriate resources. We have clear outlines and guidance for student rights and responsibilities, what we can share around student behavior and all of those things. You may typically hear a stakeholder say something about, well, student had a particular misbehavior and nothing was done about that. Often from a district standpoint, guidelines such as FERPA really dictate our ability to share follow-up consequences with individuals given their role in relation to the incident. And so all of that is clearly outlined in our handbook. Other things that are important to note are just our progressive discipline process, which really is a school administrator's ability to use their professional judgment to address behaviors how they see fit. That is a school level administrator decision. And then more recently, we've added items around transportation, one that include extended bus suspensions for students who are misbehaving on the bus. That has been important to us to make sure those are addressed. We've revamped our referral system around that to increase our communication with bus drivers and also allow for increased bus driver input throughout that process. I'll talk a little bit about how the handbook is revised every year. Again, it's not necessarily one individual that is responsible for that. Thank you, Dr. Ellison. And really, all of the decisions, all of the verbiage and narrative is really thought through, and we spend a tremendous amount of time getting stakeholder input on that document, and that really is what drives the decisions around what those consequences are, what those inappropriate behaviors are, what those resources are. All of the narrative in that, we spend about 3 to 4 months bringing in a collective group of voters, as we say, and non-voters, people who get to vote on what those changes are and people that aren't. Typical voters include parents, teachers, administrators, school principals, counselors. We have some community members on that staff, and then we also have some experts like our ADPP or our DPPs involved in that conversation to really help provide any additional information. But at the end of the day, all of that is vetted by that group. It's a rather painstaking process, as you could imagine, but it is extremely important that we have stakeholder input, and then we take that to our board for final approval, and really rely heavily on what our stakeholders bring to us around what's important for them in terms of consequences. The other thing that we've really wanted to really increase our awareness of is one around that document. It can be very narrative heavy and have a lot of technical terms. So we want to be very clear with our stakeholders around what our expectations are for behavior, that those are very high, and knowing when students don't act appropriately, there is accountability. And so we've really done a lot of what we call design work and making sure we're being user friendly in the way we're communicating that through Reels, our own website, and really trying to break down a very text heavy narrative document to make it a little bit more user friendly. Dr. Ellison?
So Dr. Anderson talked about the community influx. I always remind people that schools do not exist in silos. They exist within the context of a broader community. And when things occur in the community, 9 times out of 10, they also walk into our schools. And because of that, and because of the changing landscape in our community, we've had to also adjust how we respond to students' choices around behavior. And so we have to fold in additional resources aside from your more traditional responses to behavior to try to provide more comprehensive supports to our students and also to our staff who support our students every day. I want to talk about 6 of them, and I just want to touch on each of these briefly. So the first is staffing supports. What you'll find that's unique, I believe, about Jefferson County Public Schools is the addition of a position called School Safety Administrator. A couple of years ago, we recognized that our assistant principals and principals were inundated with issues coming from outside, which prevented them, first and foremost, from being instructional leaders in the school and supporting teachers in effective instruction and ensuring that students were learning. And so we added this safety administrator position that is a part of the administrative team in schools and is tasked with coordinating school safety. They lead safety responses when situations arise. They investigate threats and anything else that may come up that's related to safety, and they become the primary point person for that work. Overwhelmingly, our principals have said that the addition of that position has been extremely helpful because it has freed them again to focus where we want them to focus, which is on the work of teaching and learning. You'll also know that in all of our high schools, we have weapons detection systems now. We started a rollout last year in November and completed that rollout in May. Our leaders will also tell you that that has helped to decrease the number of weapons that we've seen in our schools exponentially. Our school safety administrators are also the key point person for that work as well. In addition to the safety administrators, we also have in-school security monitors. Those individuals are folks that probably touch some of our most challenging kids the most because they are walking our halls every day. They are all over our campuses. They are tasked with building relationships with students, knowing students well, and often they know about things that are occurring in students' lives outside of the building that they can then fold in additional staff members to provide support for students and families. And so that's another piece of our staffing support that has been very significant. Secondly, bullying prevention. Bullying has become multifaceted. It's not what it was when I was a kid where somebody just kind of picked on you here and there and said some stuff. But with the introduction of cell phones, everyone has a computer in their pocket and everyone can post things on various social media platforms, send anonymous messages and the like. And that has made bullying prevention much more challenging than what it has been historically. So we work to provide specific training to our staff in schools around bullying and bully prevention. We've actually set up a hotline where phone calls can be taken or online entries can be entered to communicate that there are specific issues. And we have a team in JCPS that does nothing but respond to those concerns, help to investigate those concerns, and also support schools in addressing those concerns. Again, this is one of those things where a school alone may not be able to tackle it because of the other things that are occurring in the school building during the day. And so we provide that additional support to schools as well. Safe crisis management is a philosophy of physical intervention. We all know that when you put hundreds, or in my case with high schools, thousands of kids in one building, you're going to run the risk of conflict from time to time. And that may mean that staff have to intervene. We hope that staff never have to intervene physically, but there are times times when they do. And so staff don't just intervene however they wish. They are trained in safe crisis management, which is designed to help keep the staff safe, but also students safe when that intervention is necessary. And so all of our in-school security monitors, our school administrators are trained in safe crisis management, so that in the event that they have to physically intervene in a situation, it's done with the interest of safety in a particular way. Alternative placement is a part of our schooling continuum. We have recognized that sometimes changing a student's school placement is what's best in the interest of their safety and the safety of others in their building. So alternative placement is a part of our continuum of support. We actually have two main alternative schools, Breckenridge Metropolitan High School and then also Minor Daniels Academy. Some of you all have visited one or both of those before, and they are designed to provide supports to students who make poor choices in school, but the goal is to work them through a period outside of their comprehensive school, help them work on decision making. If they need additional mental health supports, fold those in as well. And the goal is always re-entry into the comprehensive school with success. Our goal is never to keep a student in alternative placement long term, but our goal is to help them make whatever corrections or adjustments need to be made so they can make better decisions when they go back to their comprehensive school. Some of you all may be aware, but I don't want to take for granted that you know that Breckenridge Metropolitan is typically for our students who are adjudicated or are currently court active. And so there is a separation even on that continuum of alternative placement. Placement happens based upon a referral from a school administrator, and then a meeting is held with district staff, the student, and the parent to talk through the behavior. Typically, there's a history of behavior with that student. The school has been working with that student and family to try to address. And again, we make decisions about the placement, but also additional supports that the student may need. On the line of alternative placement, we have district re-engagement staff. This is a pretty unique group of individuals that are charged with helping students transition from a comprehensive school into alternative placement and transition out of alternative placement back into the comprehensive school setting. What we have found with this team is that they often build very good and sound relationships with students and families. They know students well. They are able to speak to a school after alternative placement about what exactly that student needs. And then they also follow up to make sure that those needs are being met for the student so that they are successful upon their transition back into a comprehensive school. Final resource I want to touch on is our mental health practitioners and counselors. If you talk to our school counselors, you'll probably find that most of them entered counseling because they thought they would do counseling. And when you get into the actual work of a school counselor, there is some counseling, but there are a lot of other things. There's academic advising. There's supporting students in maybe preparing for the ACT or the SAT, making college applications, work applications. There's a lot more, master scheduling even. There's a lot more on counselors' plates than just attending to the mental health needs of students. Recognizing that, we have added mental health practitioners to each of our schools. These individuals carry caseloads, so they have active caseloads of students who need mental health support, but they are also available to respond to students on an as-needed basis and also respond to staff on an as-needed basis. COVID's been hard on everybody, not just our students, but our adults as well. And transitioning out of COVID, we saw a pretty significant need for increased mental health supports. And so we've ensured that we have mental health practitioners in each of our schools. This team is also tasked with responding to schools for crisis situations. So if there happens to be the unfortunate death of a student or a staff member, school leaders can reach out to their zone leaders who can work to assemble a team of crisis responders responders that go to the school, and they'll stay 1, 2, 3, 5 days, however long is needed, and literally set up quarters in a school to be available to provide additional supports in the midst of a crisis. Our last slide touches on kind of a multi-layered approach to school safety. So again, it's not just about the consequences that are in the Student Support and Intervention Behavior Handbook, but it's also about some other things. I mentioned earlier weapons detection. We use an AI-powered weapons detection process where students and staff and visitors all are screened as they enter our high schools. Our middle schools are rolling out weapons detection this year. And again, what we have found is that in encumbering or spending the funds that were needed, some $4 million at the high school level, some $3.5 million at the middle school level to purchase these particular systems. What we have found, again, is a significant decrease in the number of weapons that are brought onto our school campuses. And while weapons detection alone is not the golden key to ensuring school safety, it is a layer and it is a significant deterrent to some of the issues that we see or had been seeing enter into our schools every day.
So school risk assessments are another layer to those safety measures. And really what those are kind of structural safety audits where we go in and make sure exterior doors are locked, teachers' doors are locked during instruction, appropriate protocols are followed when students or staff or even visitors enter the building. And so we do those. We work with the state on those to make sure that we are in compliance. But again, making sure some of the school building structural things that we can do to keep kids safe every day are followed, and we're actually doing those things. So.
Our threat assessment process is used to determine the credibility and the severity of a threat that may be communicated to a school. Some of you all are probably aware that across the Commonwealth, there have been some threats in the last week since the incident in Georgia. And so we have a process in JCPS to help our schools work through determining the level of student need or support that's necessary at a school based upon a threat that may have been communicated. School administrative teams and safety administrators are trained on whom to contact, when to reach out to them, so that we can mobilize any supports that may be necessary at a particular school. And at the district level, one of the things that our Culture and Climate Department is beginning to work on is to look at ways to use the data from our threat assessments more proactively so that we can try to anticipate better some of the things that may be coming down the line and make sure we have some supports in place to address those. With our school safety teams, what you will find is that school safety teams are made up of multiple staff members in our schools. And they're fluid based upon the student and based upon the need or the situation that arises. So it may be a particular assistant principal in a school and a mental health practitioner and the safety administrator. Another situation might be the guidance counselor and the mental health practitioner, depending on the history of the student. So again, those teams are pretty fluid, but they are designed to help ensure safety around particular situations that may arise so that school can go on with the business of school. Which is teaching and learning and not necessarily be bogged down in managing a particular threat.
So another resource, as I mentioned earlier, is increase in students experiencing violence outside of school. And so we've been innovative in creating an entire violence prevention team at the district level that is comprised of 4 case managers that really work with our students who may have experienced gun violence in some way, shape, or form to make sure they're having their needs met. They'll collaborate with the school around particular safety plans and also with students in the community and our community partners such as Ocean, Group Violence Intervention as well, to ensure as much safety as possible outside of our school doors.
mentioned school safety administrators once before. Just to go a little further with them, they are our key liaison with all of our first responders for that particular school. They are our point on threat assessments, point on weapons detection. And this was a district investment. This is a position that has been added, at least one to every high school and one to every middle school. And then we have one for each of our elementary zones. Again, able to respond to any safety concerns that may arise during the course of a school day.
And lastly, we have recently expanded our school safety officers in providing additional support to schools around some safety issues. And so we're continuing to bolster that department and hire school safety officers. I'll end by saying we are continuing to review all of our systems around discipline, all of our structures around discipline, all of our systems and structures around safety each and every day to ensure that when our kids show up, they do feel safe so that they can focus on what they're there to do, and that is learn. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
I'm going to hold you guys like in the front row, and I'm going to bring up Maddie Shepard. We've got, this is the school district perspective. Now we're going to do the teacher's perspective on discipline, and I'm going to let everybody ask their questions, but I think that we need to hear from the teachers, and then we'll kind of like tag team the questions, okay? Thank you. Maddie, when you're ready, just introduce yourself and proceed.
Hi, I'm Maddie Shepard, the president of the Jefferson County Teachers Association. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. We've got sound. What about visual? Is my presentation on here already? Okay. Perfect, thank you. So first, just some preface and framing before we get too far into it. Like everything in Jefferson County Public Schools, there's a really broad spectrum that we're looking at. We have 4 of the top 10 high schools in Kentucky and some of the lowest performing. We have some of Kentucky's most privileged and some of Kentucky's least privileged. So there's a broad spectrum, and behavior is no different. I'll also preface by saying that a lot of what schools experience is precipitated by pressure from state and federal regulations around behavior, and sometimes these regulations are in conflict with each other. I think our principals and district staff know this really well. And then I will just emphasize what the team at JCPS said, which is that these are complicated issues that we see in schools. A lot of the issues happen in community and are brought into schools, and the root causes are complicated in themselves. A lot of this stuff requires micro and macro solutions that are happening both in school and out of school. So first, I'll just go into the most recent comprehensive survey that we've done with our members from 2019, some trends around that survey, and then some bright spots, opportunities, and potential solutions. So just a general snapshot of some of the big highlighting points from our survey. 75% of responding teachers surveyed reported that they experience student behavior issues with moderate severity somewhat or rarely frequently, and then sometimes never frequently. 75% of our respondents believe that there's a high correlation between student misbehavior and mental health. This is a trend that our JCPS team cited as well, and something we'll talk about a little bit more in this presentation. 62% of respondents believe that the sub shortage and other staffing shortages correlate with student behavior issues. This is another big piece that I'll emphasize that we'll talk about a little bit later in the trends section and offer some potential solutions around. 83% of our respondents believe that misbehavior by a few students negatively impacts the impact of all of them. 58% believe that misbehaving students view being removed from class or suspended as a reward, and only 13% of our member respondents believe that removal actually results in improvement in behavior. 70% of our respondents report that principals being visible in the building, in the hallways, and classrooms has a positive impact on student behavior. And then lastly, our JCPS staff talked about this as well. 70% of respondents believe that allowing school counselors to spend more time counseling and placing more mental health professionals in schools would have a significant impact on student behavior. Now, this survey was done in 2019, and we have made changes in JCPS, including the addition of our mental health practitioners, or MHPs, as a result of a lot of data, including stuff like this. So some big trends that we wanted to emphasize, the correlation between mental health and student behavior. When we talk about mental health, this isn't always inclusive only of things that are diagnosable. Of course, we do include those things, but a lot of the mental health issues that are connected to behavior that we see manifest in schools are not necessarily things that are diagnosable or things that are clinical. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we have young adults, children, adolescents, processing and internalize what they're experiencing in communities or what they're experiencing at home. In previous presentations, it was brought up that we have a fair amount of homelessness in our city. We have violence in our homes and communities and in the news media, and a lot of these issues then permeate what happens in the school building as well. Another kind of global issue, apathy, which we might see in our attendance data. This is something that is, statewide, even nationwide. And this manifests in absences, of course, but also students just lacking engagement and not being agentic learners of their own learning experience. This may be attributed to the standardization and depersonalization that educators feel pressured to design around and implement as a result of our accountability system and the pressure and the amount of emphasis that's put on state testing. Any teacher in a classroom in the last 10 or 15 years will tell you that cell phones contribute to this as well. And then, we just have culturally an air of disrespect or lack of respect for educators or public servants. And the tone at the top definitely sets the tone for everyone else. But we do have some opportunities. A lot of educators, including JCTA members, and myself particularly, are really excited about the Kentucky United We Learn Council's reimagining assessment and accountability prototypes. We've been talking about the effect that standardized testing has on the standardization, the pressure that teachers feel around designing instruction and assessment, and the two prototypes that are outlined in this version 2.0 could result in more local control, more authentic learning experiences that better mirror what happens in students' real lives outside of the school walls and in communities, and be better positioned to address student interests and involve students' own aspirations and talents and instructional experiences. It allows for more learner-centered teaching and innovation in the school system and in classrooms, and a restoration of professional autonomy, which is something that every educator will tell you we could all benefit from. We also are really excited, not to put you too much on the spot, Dr. Nicholas, about some really good feedback that we're hearing from the teachers at Fern Creek and the community around Fern Creek High School. Fern Creek has implemented a cell phone policy that has resulted in, and I'll quote one of our teacher members, more eye contact between teachers and students, more student-to-student discussion, more classroom discussion, and less social pressure that students feel to be on their cell phones during the day. A potential solution might not be, mandating the exact same thing that Fern Creek is doing across the state, but looking at what Fern Creek is doing and what's making it successful with students, with teachers, and with families, and see what attributes of that plan might we invite and incentivize other schools or districts to look into doing as well. And then another solution, the continued prioritization of mental health. We see post-pandemic a huge emphasis on this correlation, and JCPS has made huge strides and very large financial investments to put more mental health practitioners and counselors in schools. This is a huge step, but if we were to increase this more, every teacher would tell you that the introduction of MHPs into schools has been hugely helpful, but that we need more. So we're getting good feedback from this, from families, from teachers, but more systemic support around the area of mental health is something that we all could benefit from. And then just some more explicit, specific pieces of success and solutions that we'd like to see more of. Collaborative district planning. The JCPS team talked about the Student Success and Behavior Incident Handbook. This is one of several examples of collaborative infrastructures that we use to engage not only teacher stakeholders, but administrators, families, parents, community members, to better define the type of behavior that is happening in classrooms that's undesirable, and inform research-based areas to intervene on that type of thing. We've got school-based collaborative infrastructure across a number of contexts in JCPS, not only related to the Student Success and Behavior Incident Handbook, but also related to our school-based collaborative teams. We actually have an agreement in our contract between JCTA and the Board of Education at JCPS that require collaborative teams at every school. This allows for an infrastructure that invite people from all over the school community to get involved and see all perspectives or all parts of the elephant, if you will. The more diverse voices we can engage in problem defining or solution finding, the better positioned we're all going to be to more accurately define problems, more creatively and innovatively devise solutions, but also to pre-anticipate things that people on the ground, like teachers, are in the best position to pre-anticipate. And then some more global things, solutions that would help a lot of the behavior incidents we see in schools. Grants for living wages for education support professionals. We've seen in every facet of the school community, on buses, in early childhood classrooms, in classrooms K to 12, that there is a lack of staff, a lack of teachers, a lack of support professionals. If there were some kind of investment in the pipeline or some kind of program to increase wages for everyone, this is something that would help in developing Kentucky's kids. We're seeing shortages of bus drivers. If we had bus monitors on every bus to help with behavior and just be another adult in the room, every teacher or parent or adult that's been around kids know that the better your ratio of adults to kids, the higher your chances are of success. So raising those wages for education support professionals, in addition to teachers, is something that would help everyone. More specifically, expanding CCAP into the public sector would allow for essentially giving an employee a raise without giving them a raise. CCAP, for members that don't know, is the Child Care Reimbursement Program. If public sector employees had access to this, I'm thinking specifically about our education support professionals, were able to keep a larger amount of their paycheck that they would have otherwise used for childcare. This would be huge in allowing us to recruit and retain for more positions that we're lacking right now. And then grants to not only for schools, but thinking about the context outside of schools. A lot of this that we see in schools has to do with what's happening in the community. If we're able to use our resources to identify what are the community root causes that manifest in schools and then address those root causes, that would go a long way in improving student behavior in schools.
Okay, if you guys want to come on back up, and we'll do this as kind of a group, and if you could please direct your questions to who you prefer to answer it. Senator Tishner.
Okay, thank you. I have a lot of questions. It might take a whole committee meeting for that.
No.
I won't. Okay, I really was hoping to get data today. Like, I'm looking for information. I read through the handbook, almost made it all the way through, just a few pages left. And there's some definitely great things that you guys have thought a lot through how to handle behavioral issues, but I want to know what's actually going on inside the building. If there's any way I could get data, can I just start reading off some things I would like, and then maybe you could get that to the whole committee? That would be really helpful.
Yes.
I would like to know the number of guns that were brought into the school last year. I would like to know how many students were expelled from that. I would like to know the number of incidents that occurred on buses, disciplinary issues, and what the punishments typically are. How many bus drivers have quit or been fired over violence on the buses. I would like to know how many students on student assaults have happened. Just 1 year would be great. How many student on staff assaults and how many resulted in suspension or expulsion, and how many teachers have left in regards to student on staff, excuse me. I would like to know how many sexual assaults and rapes have happened student on student and teacher on student. And I would like to know what those punishments are. And I would like to know which schools are seeing the majority of these incidences, if it's, particular high schools or middle schools, which schools you're seeing those levels. Because I listen to all of this and I read through this handbook, and I've pulled up the data for JCPS all the way back to 2011. There have been 2 expulsions since 2011. And I'm certain there have been incidences that would warrant an expulsion within the school, but it's not happening. And that's something that concerns me. And I also look at, in your handbook, the restorative practice model that came into play in JCPS in 2016, and looking at the number of suspensions that have gone really significantly up since 2016 when that was implemented. And it seems to be like a practice that isn't really working and not helping. We've seen instances of bullying that have led to suicide. And I'm concerned that restorative practices aren't effective. And I've also just been sent a GoFundMe for a teacher that was assaulted and is healing in JCPS, and they're trying to raise money for him because he can't work. So these are things that are concerning to me when I want to know what's going on inside the building. So I don't really have a question, but a lot of questions that if you could get that data, I think that'd be helpful for us. Thank you.
A lot of homework.
Yes, we'll work on that.
Okay. All right. Mrs. Savannah Baker.
Hi, I have a question about your alternative placements. I'm just curious if you do use data to track when you're ready to transition a child into a different school, when you're ready to put them back into the comprehensive school. How are you tracking that criteria? And then, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I have a second interrelated question.
Go ahead.
And that's whether the alternative placements have increased over the past couple years, especially post-COVID.
Yes, so we use grades, behavior, and attendance. If a student's not ready to go back to their traditional or reside school, that student would remain in an alternative setting until they meet those requirements. We have a pretty stringent process for that. And again, those are for non-disabled, non-ECE students that would follow that protocol. Our other students who have disabilities would follow IDEA law around that. But yes, it's grades, behavior, and attendance. That is the criteria for which students are exiting. Our placements have been pretty consistent coming out of COVID each year. And we can get you specific numbers if you'd like those as well. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Wurtenberger.
Thank you. Right here. My questions probably connect or piggyback off of Senator Tishner's. So you hear quite often that a minority of students are causing most of the issues, and I think that was in the teacher survey, 83%. Do we have data that proves that out or not? Proves that it's true or not?
Yeah, we could get you that data to share with you, yes.
So I'm going back to the intervention handbook. So, and you described how revisions were made and who was involved. I'm curious, how do you even go about identifying what needs to maybe change? Mm-hmm. And also what's working and what's not, which obviously leads into changes.
Yeah, so primarily changes that are going to happen regardless of that stakeholder are going to be legislative or state policy changes that happened each year. We're going to automatically change those. But issues are brought up by stakeholder committee members. If a parent or assistant principal or teacher has a concern or thinks a particular item within the handbook needs to be changed or addressed, we bring that to the committee. And then from that, we share that with each of the stakeholder groups to get additional feedback and then come back and collectively decide around that being accepted as a revision or a change.
Okay. Can I follow up?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping to hear you say that maybe there's some broad analysis that's done over the behaviors that we're seeing most frequently and the policies that we have around those behaviors and determining whether they're working or not and need to be changed, sort of at a macro level versus a micro level, if you will. Is that any of that occur?
Yeah, depending on the revision and what we're talking about, we will very much depend and take a look at data and see what's trending and what's going on in those areas. But again, we're relying on our stakeholders for that feedback and our experts in the room for what does research say about how we would address that, and then how we should move forward in terms of changes.
Okay.
But we do, yes, thank you.
One more question. Yeah.
Briefly, go.
Cell phones. Apparently, that's not a district-wide policy that PRP has. It's school by school.
Yeah. There it is a handbook violation, and several years ago, if I remember correctly, some schools filed for a waiver to ensure that they could be used, and then some schools selected and opted out of that. Fern Creek would be one of those schools, so it is a school-based decision.
I'm just surprised by that, just because I think the data is pretty evident that they're a problem. I mean, when the smartphones first came out, it didn't take long to figure out we shouldn't be using these things in cars. Well, I think the same thing applies to classrooms.
So in an earlier iteration of the handbook, cell phones were not allowed, but that was also prior to the emergence of iPads, Chromebooks to use for instruction. And so a lot of teachers wanted to utilize them as an instructional tool in the classroom, which is where the filing for the waiver came into play. Also with site-based decision-making councils, councils and schools develop their own policies for how to manage and address those particular the use of phones in schools. So that's where you get some of that derivation as far as how one school does it versus another. Fern Creek, which was the example that Ms. Shepard raised, has just entered into a new approach this year. So they've literally been doing it now for going on 6 weeks. We're anticipating their data to take a look at it and continue to gauge stakeholder feedback as well, so that other schools and school leaders can determine if that's something they might want to engage in as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 2 questions.
Okay.
All right. Dr. Polio was here kind of earlier, and he kind of alluded to it, but I know there's a federal resolution agreement that looks at how we our approach to behavior. How does that affect your work and your view on? And if it's not resolution agreement, the only thing I can think of is kind of like a consent decree on our approach to behavior about the amount of suspensions. I know that Black boys are always the highest to be suspended. So how does that affect your approach to the work or your lens of behavior in the school system?
It's definitely consideration. What we really want schools to do, and what we really want to empower schools to do, is to take a look at their behavior data respective to their school. So we provide data reports to schools. We create a template for them to use as school-based teams to take a look at their data. That is an element of something that we ask that they explore as a part of that process, but also looking at what might be some other behaviors that are manifesting particular at that site, and what resources or changes does the school need to be making to address those concerns.
All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then this for JCTA, what are you hearing your suggestions are for handling students with behavioral disorders that make it tough to suspend or harshly discipline?
When you say behavior disorders, do you mean like diagnosed behavior disorders, or do you mean it in a more broad sense?
Just any sense that you'd like to answer the question. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of pressure, as you noted before, to monitor the number of suspensions. Less suspensions doesn't necessarily mean improved behavior. It just means less suspension. I think from the teacher perspective, our survey data showed that taking a student out of class doesn't always result in improved behavior for that student. But I think what our data will also show is that for the rest of the class, the academic integrity and the classroom culture is improved as a result of the removal of the behavior. So it's a fine line that teachers and principals walk between trying to make sure that the requirements are met on numbers of suspensions or expulsions versus trying to address behavior in a meaningful way.
And I just want to add on that. I agree, Maddie. There's one thing I don't is we don't necessarily have metrics would say this is the amount of suspensions a school might have or limit that in any way, shape, or form. It's something we really just want them to take a look at and be mindful of for many of the same reasons.
Okay. Ms. Maston.
Hello, everyone. I think I kind of understood your question, but I got two questions. But my first question is, I know you talked about the district re-engagement department or the group of people, and I know you said that they transitioned students. So my question is, do they transition on all levels, like elementary, middle, and high school? And then also, do they transition kids if they're like in the Brook or they go to a treatment facility? Do they transition them back into a classroom, or they're going back into JCPS?
The stuff we were particularly talking about as it related to alternative placements was primarily for middle and high school as they transition back to a regular education environment. I do believe the ECE department has some additional re-engagement staff that may assist in some transitions in that way, but I can't speak to that specifically. Yep. Kim just said yes, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a parent, and I must have missed that out because I have a son that was in a treatment facility and then went to JCPS and did not get a transition. So maybe that's something else I need to talk about. But my second question is, as a parent, I talk to a lot of teachers as an advocate for teachers and schools and students. And I know that a teacher was mentioning to me about some type of student behavior support team. I don't know if you talked about that, and that they have some kind of board certified behavior analyst, that it's like a 2-model approach that we're trying to do within schools. Can you talk a little bit about that, and if they are doing that, and has it been successful? Is there any data on that?
So yeah, that's what I was mentioning a little bit as a part of the school team that's going to review data and prioritize needs and figure out how they can better support students. We have board certified behavior analysts at the district level that can come in and do some behavior intervention plans. They'll take data on particular students and really trying to see, maybe identify what might be a trigger, what might be in that particular case escalating a student, and try to come up with a plan to support that. And I want to be clear, that doesn't always also mean that they're not also getting consequences in that situation, but definitely trying to prevent that from happening in the future, and really trying to get at the underlying root cause need that you continue to hear today. So we have seen some success in that area, and those are at the elementary, middle, and high levels.
Okay, thank you. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Ms. Shepard, I just want to say congratulations on your ascent to being the president. You have some big shoes to fill, although I might take that back and say no, it'll be very easy to fill. And I'm kidding with your predecessor. He did a wonderful job, and it's a pleasure to work with him. Two questions for you, if you don't mind. Last year we passed, I think it was House Bill 538 that dealt with school student discipline, and in there gave a lot of flexibility to this teacher to remove a child who is just disruptive. Have you seen any impact of that, or has any policy come back to reinforce you're basically empowering the teachers to go follow through on that particular inclusion in the bill?
Generally, I'll say that we are in favor of, if legislation has to occur that is around student discipline or behavior, that it does provide flexibility. We've not polled our members on if that particular legislation, if they've seen the effects of that or not. What our data does show is that removing students doesn't necessarily improve the behavior. I think, related back to your question, Mr. Baker, the thing that most teachers would report improved student behavior as having more adults to intervene, more adults to give attention to students that are acting out, more adults to coach a student back to being in the classroom, and to continue instruction, maybe in a different setting outside of the regular classroom.
Okay. 2 follow-up, but real quick.
Quickly, please.
I'll
I'm
be
getting
quick.
us out of here at 3:30 no
I
matter
hear
what.
You. I hear you. So let me ask you this, Ms. Shepard. So you haven't heard anything from the board or from the superintendent in terms of this particular provisions or any of these provisions within this bill?
I've not heard anything. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not been said,
Sure.
but I haven't heard anything.
Okay. And you made an interesting comment, if you don't mind, if you could expand on that. Basically, you said the tone, you're talking about discipline and supporting the teachers, which I do support the teachers, not only in pay, but also give them respect, make sure in the classroom. But you said there the tone comes from the top. Could you expand on that?
Sure. People that are in power, more visible in the media, are often looked to when setting norms or parameters on how we treat public servants, including teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, and I'll try and be brief. I know the hour is late, and I certainly do not envy the job that you have when it comes to student behavior, discipline. Over the summer, I happened to run into a constituent who I knew was a JCPS teacher. I just said, well, you ready for school to start back? I retired 22 years. So I'm inquiring about the reason for the retirement, and the answer I get is I got tired of being cussed out by my students every day. She taught kindergarten. And, a lot of times we talk about the COVID issue. And I read an article last week that said it's time to quit blaming COVID on everything. We have cultural issues. We have societal issues that we have to address. And I just want to emphasize that. And I know teachers, school districts, you're being asked to do things you were never equipped to do. You should never have been asked to do, but that's the situation that we're in right now. So we all need to recognize that. On the House Bill 538 that went for House Education, that was in 2023, the goal of that bill, Representative Truitt, was if a teacher had a student who was just completely disruptive, get them out of the classroom and they don't come back to that class that day. At least get them out of there that day, give that teacher an opportunity to be able to instruct the rest of the class that's interested in learning. And then hopefully that student could be reintegrated into the classroom. I've been to Breckenridge Metro. I've talked to the teachers. I've talked to the students. I understand some of the challenges they have. This is not easy stuff. And JCPS is in an urban setting, and there are a lot of issues out there. And I think, I grew up at a time, if I got in trouble at school, I was in more trouble when I got home. And that's not the case anymore. And parents have to be involved in this. The community has to be involved in this process, and we have to raise expectations. Sounds like I'm preaching now. Maybe I am a little bit. But one quick question. There was a very highly visible incident on a school bus in JCPS recently. I know we passed House Bill 446 this session, dealing with giving bus drivers more authority in regard to discipline on the buses. Part of that required that parents sign off on an agreement on policy. Have you had much resistance from parents on that? How's that process going of parents reviewing those policies and being willing to sign off on those policies for their child to ride the bus?
I know those have been shared with parents in terms of any pushback or anything from that. I'm not aware of any of that at this time.
Okay. Mrs. Abdelahat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Sorry. 2 questions. One, more anecdotally, we heard at Mayo High School from a couple of teachers about referrals and that they just aren't writing referrals anymore. Data is always the best, but it might be a sort of suspension question too. Like, what is the belief as to why teachers aren't writing referrals anymore? Is it ineffective, or maybe that might be more for, it's Ms. Shepard, right? Ms. Shepard to answer from a teacher's standpoint, or anybody, but.
I'll start on the school side, and then Maddie, if you want to chime in, that's fine. I would say that sometimes there's a lack of understanding of the progressive discipline approach. And part of how we articulate to our teachers is that once they write a referral and that goes to an administrator, the administrator has professional judgment and discretion in relationship to our handbook and code of conduct to make a decision on the consequence. Sometimes because in the moment, a teacher may expect something done that's not consistent with progressive discipline or with our handbook. And so sometimes frustration then leads them to disengage from the process. The only way an administrator typically is going to know that there's an issue is if there is communication by way of the referral, unless it's a fairly egregious situation to which an in-school security monitor or administrator may respond. My encouragement would be to a teacher that if their responses in the classroom have not been successful, then they follow the process that's set forth in the school, which is to write a referral. That if there's a behavior that continues over time, then the administrator's response is going to change over time as well. And so sometimes there's a disconnect in that understanding. Some staff members want something here to happen when what's required is here because it's a first offense or a second offense. Progressive discipline is laid out in our handbook, and our leaders are bound to follow it, and they do. And so I think that may be part or parcel of the problem.
Thank you.
Student behavior, I don't think it'll surprise anyone, is the number one thing that we get feedback on from our members. Just to reiterate what Representative Tipton alluded to and what we've all talked about, this isn't just a result of what's happening in schools. This is what's happening in society, in community. It's something that we have to partner with parents and the community on to address. I think the issues that a lot of teachers will report, whether they write a referral or not, could have been solved if we were able to fill all the open positions that we have. The number of open positions early childhood has that are both teacher and support staff. If we were able to fill all of the bus monitor postings that we have for our buses, I think we'd see a significant difference in the behavior incidents that teachers are writing referrals on or not.
Thank you.
Okay. And Dr. Nichols.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment briefly. I know you mentioned Fern Creek, and I just want it noted that this is undertaking, cell phone restrictions or bans or whatever. It wasn't done capriciously. We worked for about 6 months before we went forward. We built a guiding coalition. We brought in our parents, our families. We surveyed our teachers, our students. We worked really, really hard to come up with a plan that we thought we had the infrastructure to support, and we made sure that everybody knew what we were doing. So it is working so far, but I did want to note it that it's not an easy fix by any means. It takes a lot of time and resources and investment from all your stakeholders. The other thing I wanted to comment on, so I've been in JCPS for 25 years. I was a teacher and an assistant principal at Doss High School and an assistant principal, and now I'm in my 7th year as principal at Fern Creek. There are definitely challenging students in my career, and I was probably an assistant principal longer than I did anything else. But I have never been told not to suspend a student. I have never been told you can't do that. Sometimes when we ask teachers to look at a referral and then we ask them to look at the behavior matrix and we let them see like what happens when this happens, it does clear up some of the things that we think that there's a judgment call, but there's not really a judgment call because it's all very, very clearly laid out. So if there is a question that I have to ask, I guess I would ask Matt and Dr. Ellison, have you ever told a principal that they can't suspend a student? No. It doesn't happen, at least not in my experience or in the experience of my peers.
Thank you. And final question or comment, Senator Nemes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a lot of comments and questions that I'm not going to ask you to respond now, and then an overarching question that I'd like for you to answer. The teacher survey, what has been done to address this? Does the administration back the teachers? We're hearing not. JCTA teachers are trained and able to address behavior fights, but is that really true? We had this was out not in Jefferson County, in 2010 where a state rep was killed breaking up a fight. So asking teachers to do that, are they really able to do that? And then you mentioned the removal is a reward, does not help behavior. We heard that a suspension, the same thing, staying home. I go along with that. But the effect on the other students is what we need to also address. That student coming back or staying in the classroom affects the rest of the students very negatively. We have to address that. And FERPA, I know you showed us where to find that information. We were hoping that you would explain that and show it to us. Bus policies, are they followed through? I was very disappointed Teamsters did not come. We asked them to come. I'm glad the teachers union did. The weapons detection, it's not just guns, it's also it's knives and other things too. What is the ramifications for those students that have brought them? Do we do I know there was a big problem with checking lockers, but do we also do checks for things inside the schools? You said a lot about society and parents and this and that. That's true. The kids come to school with problems, but we have to address and we have to teach on premise what we can do there. We can't help society. We try to help the kids because of their background, but we need to more focus on what is happening in the school than the society. And I thank you very much for your presentation and for being here and being very cooperative. Jefferson County Public Schools have been very cooperative. We've asked them to come and this and that and other. But I want to get a little bit real here. I know the future steps we're working on this, that, and other, but we have to address the now steps. And what we're hearing from teachers, the community, first of all, I'm very disappointed in the lack of attendance for the teachers, the parents, and the community. Maybe they just didn't know about it or care. But I appreciate you all coming. But let's get real. We're hearing from them a lot different than what we're hearing from you all. We're hearing that there's no support from you all. We're hearing that there's problems in the schools. We're seeing on the news the fights in the buses. We're seeing on the news the fights in the high schools. We're hearing from the parents of our kids are getting beat up and this and that, are scared to go to school. So that is my question. How do you address that? Is it true? Not?
Yeah, I'll start. I know there's a lot of anecdotal narrative out there around all of those things. We're aware of that as a district. As I mentioned before, our ability to respond to some of those situations. We had somebody mention a particular event earlier. We are very limited in our ability to speak directly on how those situations are handled. I assure you, we do handle and address appropriately any significant safety issue. Dr. Ellison and I work on those numerously. Alongside some other district level team members to make sure, one, that we are in compliance, but two, that we are holding students accountable in terms of suspensions. I'll speak generally in terms of alternative placement. Those things are happening, and we do everything we can when we can to support teachers, students, and our staff, other staff involved in those situations. And we have we have conversations, again, around ensuring those things happen and that we are as consistent as we can possibly be in those situations.
The only thing I will add is a reiteration of what Dr. Nicholas prompted us to say, which is that we've never looked at an administrator and said if it was behavior worthy of a suspension to not suspend a student. If Dr. Polio were sitting here, he would tell you the same. And so, again, it's about being consistent, as Dr. Anderson said, with our handbook and looking at the behaviors that have been indicated as short-term or long-term suspension, and then ensuring that we follow through with that. Zone leaders such as myself are thought partners with our building principals when there are significant situations. We talk through them, we work through them, we take multi-layered approaches to those situations. When we re-enter a student from suspension, there's often a meeting with an administrator, sometimes with a counselor or a mental health practitioner as well, recognizing that there are other dynamics at play in the situation than just the behavior itself. And so it's much broader, not just even going macro into the community, but macro as far as the school is concerned, that we pull in multiple staff members to try to support students in making better decisions. There's always going to be conflict in schools. There are always going to be issues and situations that arise in schools, some of which are more impactful and more severe than others. We do our best to address them when we know things in advance. We are highly proactive in talking to students, in including other stakeholders, parents even, for conferences and conversations to try to dissuade poor decisions. We are not always successful, and when those things do occur, we respond to them, and we tell our administrators to respond to them as well.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, I think you would hear if Dr. Polio was here, he would say the same. We want to know when those situations are occurring for many of the reasons Dr. Ellison just said. But we do want to make sure those issues are being addressed. We do want to make sure staff feel supported. Again, our ability to follow up in those situations is a little bit limited, but I encourage you to share those with us. We do look into every one of those and ensure that we're addressing them appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I failed. It is 3:33. But next meeting will be on Monday, October 7th, same room we're in right now. And we will be discussing data on outcomes for high school graduates and other critical data from the Kentucky statistics. And may I have a motion to adjourn? Motion. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.